planet's on fire. It's a real code red. Got us by the balls, we're being slowly bled. All the swollen puppet head propagandized. Big chocolate points and flat outlines. A house full of mirrors, it's a lousy reflection. Run hard left, it's a true direction. Democracy's in trouble, this news isn't fake. Everything we fought for is truly at stake. Border to border, coast to coast, it's time to cue the challenge and meet our host. It's a podcast by George. All right, folks, it's showtime.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. Got a very special edition here. We've got a returnee, Matt Ho's coming back on the podcast. You've seen him lots of times, but man, he's right in the middle of some big time national news coming out of North Carolina and some political hijinks that really stinks. That's the title of the show. And, you know, when I got into doing this podcast, I had no idea what was going on out there. And you realize that you see it, you understand it when you get hit up beside the head with it. And by the way, we kind of did that with the weather again here in the central part of the United States. I was going to have this on Tuesday, actually, and another derecho came through portions of the state of Iowa, and Mediacom internet went out, wasn't exactly connected as far as they know, but it may have had something to do with the derecho. And I got to tell you something, folks, this climate change thing, I've been a weather observer. I used to do the weather. I've been looking at this for 50 years. I've never seen anything like it with these derechos. We've had one here about every 6 months or so. We just had another one, and the sky turned green. I don't know if you saw those graphics or not, but my God, if you didn't believe in climate change, I mean, look out your window. It is smacking you upside the head. And we're going to be talking some green things today. We're going to be talking Green Party. I got my green shirt on. But let's do our intro here. Let's introduce our guest here with his live line graphic. It's Matthew Ho, and he's running to represent North Carolina in the U.S. Senate on the Green Party ticket. For North Carolina Green Party to run candidates on the ballot, they needed to collect 14,000 valid signatures by May 15th, 2022. That's the information that I had anyway. And they overfilled the bucket. They did that and then some. But we're going to find out, but what? For those that may not know, in 2009, Matthew Ho resigned his post in protest in Afghanistan with the State Department over the American escalation of the war. Prior to his assignment in Afghanistan, Matthew took part in the American occupation of Iraq, first in 04-05 in Salah ad-Din province with a State Department reconstruction and governance team. And then in 2006-2007 in Anbar province as a Marine Corps company commander. Right. He's a Marine, folks. When not deployed, Matthew worked on Afghanistan and Iraq war policy and operations issues at the Pentagon and State Department from 02 to 08. Now, we're going to start off the show talking about some topical news, and the reason for that is that bio explains some of it. This guy is an outstanding candidate for the U.S. Senate, but he's also all knowledgeable about issues afflicting this country, domestic and abroad. And in 2010, Matthew was named the Ridenour Prize recipient for truth-telling. I like to mention that, truth-telling. He's a truth-teller, folks. In 2021, he was awarded Defender of Liberty by the Committee for the Republic. Matthew is a member of the Board of Directors for the Institute for Public Accuracy, advisory board member for the Committee to Defend Julian Assange. We're going to be talking about journalism and civil liberties, Expose Facts, North Carolina Committee to Investigate Torture, the Resistance Center for Peace and Justice, Veterans for Peace, and World Beyond War. Man, he's my guy. I got to tell you, I love Matthew Ho. So let's get him on in here. Let's bring him into the stream and say good morning to Matt. You've been doing a few shows, man. I'm glad to have you on mine.
Hey, thanks, George. Of course. I'm happy to be here. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And like I said, my God, we got more things here than we can get to. And we're going to talk about this deal in North Carolina, which is, I mean, it's hard to believe, really, for somebody that has been, a lifelong Democrat. That's the way that I voted my entire life. But I'm looking at this and I'm going, I am not a part of this, folks. But stay tuned here. We're going to get to it. I'm going to start off talking about journalism because this is something that is near and dear to my heart. I have a journalism degree. I worked in journalism. I have been shocked and appalled about the degeneration of journalism in America. Most obviously, I mean, my God, anybody can figure this out with the Julian Assange situation. We had Misty Winston on here just about a week or so ago. Go back and check out that podcast because we talk about that at length. You can see the Assange poster in Matt's background there. He's also all knowledgeable about that. We're not going to talk about Assange today, though. Who we are going to talk about is the Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. And this headline from the USA Today that says the shot that killed her likely was fired from Israelis. And the reason I'm bringing this up is this didn't get a lot of notice. I mean, this didn't get the kind of coverage that it deserves. Neither is Assange, certainly. But my God, journalists, let's go. Let's start to cover this. Let's pick up on it. Let me read this now. I got to get it big enough so I can see it. U.S. officials have concluded that gunfire from Israeli positions likely killed Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, but there was no reason to believe her shooting was intentional. That's what our venerable State Department said Monday. The finding in a statement from State Department spokesman Ned Price, Ned Price, came after what the U.S. said were inconclusive tests under U.S. oversight of the bullet recovered from Abu Akleh's body. It said independent third-party examiners, I don't know who that would be, had conducted an extremely detailed forensic analysis. Ballistic experts determined the bullet was badly damaged. Yeah, bullets tend to do that when they blow off people's heads, folks, which presented a clear conclusion as to who fired the shot, Price said in the statement. Abu Akleh, a veteran Palestinian-American correspondent who was well known throughout the Arab world, was shot and killed while covering an Israeli military raid on May 11th in the Jenin refugee camp in the occupied West Bank. That just goes by. You just read that. Wait a minute. She was covering an Israeli military raid on May 11th in the Jenin refugee camp in the occupied West Bank. That's what was going on at the time. Palestinian eyewitnesses, including her crew, say Israeli troops killed her, and there were no militants in the immediate vicinity for them to be shooting at. And there's a nice image of Shireen. God rest her soul. Rest in peace. Now, I want to read this, and again, Matt's extremely well qualified to comment on this. Matter of fact, I like to tell, the first time I learned of Matt Ho was on Chris Hedges' show on RT. Yeah. And Chris Hedges has got a very detailed article on this, and he knows, man, this guy's a Pulitzer Prize winning war correspondent. He's served in the Middle East. He speaks Arabic. This guy, he is the go-to source for all things like this. And this is what Chris Hedges says, Matt. Shireen Abu Akleh, the Al Jazeera reporter with more than 2 decades of experience covering armed conflicts, knew the protocol. She and other reporters remained last Wednesday on the open. Now, this was when it was written last Wednesday, clearly visible to Israeli snipers about 650 feet away in a building. Her flak jacket and helmet were emblazoned with the word press. There were 3 shots fired in her direction. The second bullet hit the Al Jazeera producer, Ali Al-Samoudi, in the back. The third shot, Al-Samoudi remembered, hit Abu Akleh in the face below the rim of her helmet. There were a few seconds when the Israeli sniper saw profiled in his scope Abu Akleh, one of the most recognizable faces in the Middle East. The 5.56 millimeter bullet from the M16 designed to spend end over end upon impact. Yeah, think about this. It's like being hit with a bullet like it's a pop can instead of a bullet. I mean, it blows things apart. Would have obliterated most of Abu Akleh's head. The accuracy of the M16, especially the M16 A4s, and Matt knows about this stuff, I don't, equipped with the Advanced Combat Optical Gun Sight, a prismatic telescopic sight, is very high. In the fighting in Fallujah, so many dead insurgents were found with head wounds that observers at first thought they had been executed. The bullet that killed Abu Akleh was deftly placed between the very slim opening separating her helmet and the collar of her flak jacket. That's only a sniper doing that. That's only somebody that's good at their craft. That's only somebody that has this type of weaponry. Matt, I don't suppose there's any doubt in your mind as to what happened here.
No. I mean, particularly the shot underneath the helmet, that takes a good shot. I mean, with the rifles and with those sights, shooting someone 650 feet away is, look, in the Marine Corps, you begin your rifle qualification at 200 yards, which is 600 feet. That's the shortest distance you begin at, is 200 yards. So hitting someone from 200 yards away, or 600 feet, or 650 feet in this case, is not difficult, particularly when you have that type of sight. We were doing that with iron sights without these advanced, scopes, as they're commonly called. But give me an idea, when you have a scope like that. The last time I qualified with a rifle in the Marine Corps, at 500 yards with a scope like that, I had 7 or 8, I can't remember which, hits out of 10 shots I took at 500 yards or 1,500 feet. And she was only 600 feet away. And so clearly it was an easy shot for a trained marksman. And even so, even more if this was an actual sniper. But the more to the point I'm trying to make is that it was abundantly clear who they were shooting. She was clearly marked. She was in a gaggle of press people, if you will, right? I mean, and no, this is a blatant war crime. And the reason it took place was because of just simple hatred and the idea that might makes right, and that they felt they could get away with it. And they are going to get away with it. I mean, you look at the response of the American government towards this, typical, and I heard your exclamation about Ned Price, which is absolutely right. The guy's a CIA agent, and now he's a spokesperson for the State Department. The CIA, all it does is lie. That's what their whole purpose in being is, to lie. And that's a spokesperson for the State Department. We're supposed to believe that there is some third-party independent expert who said it. No, and there's been a number of other groups that have verified what Hedge is saying, what you're saying, that this was an Israeli military unit that deliberately shot and killed Shireen Abu Akleh.
Yeah, and if anybody has any doubt about what happened, as Matt mentioned, this was a hero in the Arab world. She was like NBC nightly news to us. This, and war correspondents to me, again, I talk about this creme de la creme in the journalist community. That's it, man. These people are heroes. They are in harm's way, and they're showing us the horror of war. And unfortunately, my God, she paid for it with her life. And again, anybody that has any doubt, for Christ's sake, they attacked her funeral. Right. That's unbelievable. That is beyond the pale. And how anybody could defend that or get behind that or obfuscate that, that is it just makes me sick.
Well, and the hypocrisy with the American government and its support for Israel, its continual support for Israel, its willingness to make excuses for Israel and to lie on behalf of Israel, and does the same for Saudi Arabia. It does the same for Egypt. These regimes that are mass violators of human rights, that hurt and brutalize their own people, murder people who are not theirs, say what the Saudis are doing to the Yemenis, and the continual support for the American government for those governments. You had me on last year to talk about how the United States government provides military assistance to approximately 75% of the world's dictatorships. If you go and you look at all the different military regimes, the monarchies, the authoritarian states, well, if you look at those 50 some odd as they're counted by Freedom House, almost 75% of them receive military assistance from the American government every year. And that doesn't even count other nations that are mass violators of human rights, but happen to be technically democracies like the Philippines or Colombia, that the United States, again, supports wholeheartedly with military assistance.
Well, we've got a lot of other stories to get through, but I want to tell people to follow this closely because, as I mentioned when I had Misty Winston on my show, folks, you can't make decisions. We can't change anything if we don't know what the hell is going on. And if we put these people in prison for life, like Julian Assange appears to be, and God, let's hope that's not the case, or we blow their heads off, like they did with Shireen, we're all doomed. I mean, we ain't going nowhere. We're not going to get out of this alive, any of us. That's what the First Amendment is about in this country, and people need to line up behind this. And I'm calling on journalists, if anybody will listen to me, to cover this stuff more than they are. It couldn't be more important. Well, let me go to some of these other stories, because, you know, I go through my daily newspaper, my news feed, Matt, and I got to talk to Matt Ho about these things. I got to get this on. Okay, so here's this one out of the Associated Press. Anthony Blinken sets G20 meeting with Chinese foreign minister silent on Russia. And this is interesting. The Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, will see his Chinese counterpart this week at a meeting of foreign ministers from the group of 20 bloc of nations that will likely exacerbate splits over Russia's war in Ukraine. Now, here's the part that started to interest me. While strained U.S.-China ties will be the focus of Blinken's talks with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, the broader G20 gathering in Indonesia of leading industrialized nations will almost certainly be overshadowed by the Ukraine conflict and its effect on global food and energy security. Wars have a tendency to do that, folks. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, that Lavrov guy, he'll be there. Now, this is marking the first time that he and Blinken will be in the same room, let alone the same city, at the same time, and nearly 6 months. What's transpired in those 6 months, folks, in Ukraine? Yeah, lots of dead people, lots of them. The State Department announced Tuesday that Blinken would meet with Wang in Bali, but had little to say about the possibility of him seeing Lavrov, who the U.S. has shunned. This sounds like a junior high dance or something like that. When you read into this thing, we're shunning this guy, and people are being blown apart, men, women, and children in Ukraine on both sides of the issue. We're shunning this guy. We're not going to talk to him, folks. Since the Ukraine invasion in February, U.S. officials have accused Lavrov and other Russian diplomats of a lack of seriousness in the run-up to the Ukraine war. But of course, we wouldn't know because we won't talk to him. The Biden administration has ruled out business as usual. Here's your corporatocracy. Here's your capitalism coming into it. This is what gets high in this story. It's business, folks. Well, we're ruling that out with Russia while it remains in Ukraine. And U.S. officials said there would be no formal discussions between Blinken and Lavrov in Bali, but they could not rule out the possibility of a chance encounter. Think about that junior high dance that I talked about. Honest to God, which would be their first since they last met in Geneva in January. The secretary intends to engage fully in the G20. I'm not going to speak to any plans on the part of Foreign Minister Lavrov, but I can tell you the secretary will be a full and active participant in the G20, which we see as a valuable forum. State Department spokesman Ned Price, who Matt just told you about, that was his comment on this. I mean, I read this shit, man. I can't believe it. Honest to God.
Look, Tony Blinken, like the vast majority of other senior people in the administration, and not just the Democratic administration, but also the Republican administrations, is nothing more than an influence peddler and an access peddler. That's it. That's all he is. And I say that, and I mean that in the clearest possible manner. These are who lead our government, are men and women who are devoted to ensuring that what they have can be used as a transaction for something more, and so they are influence peddlers and access peddlers. They're in the administration, they leave the administration, they go to these lobbying firms, they go to these consulting firms, they sit on the board of directors for the companies that they are directly involved in when they're with government. So of course, we most especially see, Pentagon officials going to the boards of Raytheon and Lockheed and things like that. But that's what we have. And it's just not the Democrats. It's also the Republicans. And so the idea that Blinken would somehow be interested in doing his job as Secretary of State, the fact that he has not made an attempt to speak with Lavrov, as far as I know, the same from Lavrov as well. But Blinken is our guy, and that crystallizes, that really shows what we have as a form of government and who these people are that populate that government. They are interested in pushing forward their agenda for their own purposes rather than achieving something that has any degree of value for the American public, let alone then for the Ukrainian people who are dying so needlessly and horrifically in such a dirty, dirty war. This idea that, and I remember you saying this when I spoke to you about the war in Ukraine back in February or whenever, you were apoplectic, George. Why is Joe Biden not getting on a plane and going to talk to Vladimir Putin? What did we elect him for? Right. We anyone could do this job of just sending tens of billions of dollars to the Ukrainians. Anyone can do that. My dogs can do that. Where is the leadership here? And it's clear that in Ukraine, and again, we've talked about this before, clearly, because you can't say anything without having to give the caveat, but clearly condemning Russia's invasion and occupation, that the goal from the American side is to prolong this war as long as possible in order to exhaust the Russians in an attempt to destabilize their government, to bring Vladimir Putin's government down. I don't think that's going to work. I think it's much more likely that Zelensky's government's going to fall before Putin's government falls. And then you're going to have, if you think you've got a mess now, what do you think is going to come out of that? But this is what, you and I have been saying. This is what, war is a breeding ground of unintended consequences that you cannot predict and you cannot control. And I fear the longer it goes on, the more you're going to have that. But this idea that they're not even doing the minimum to try and avert continued slaughter, let alone these unintended consequences, a creation of some type of Frankenstein's monster, and how daft are we to say, oh no, this one's going to work out. Iraq, Vietnam, Syria, Afghanistan, all those didn't work out, but this war is going to work out. It's absolutely, and it goes back again to what I've said about this, and the only thing I should say is I don't know how it's going to end. The only thing I know is it's going to end in a way that is different than what the experts are telling you. And that the second part is no one is ever going to be held accountable for it.
Yeah, that's a certainty. A great personal hero of mine is Muhammad Ali, and I can't help but think about Muhammad Ali. You know what he would do? He'd get his ass on a plane and go over there. He would meet with those people. He was one of the most recognized. I think he was considered to be the most recognized person in the world. He would go over there and he would talk peace. He would do what he could. That's what I want these people to do. It's oversimplified maybe, but as Matt mentioned, I called on Biden to do that. Hell, he'd get his party reelected in 2022. He'd get himself reelected if he could stagger to the podium in 2024, if he'd go over there and get this thing resolved. I know Matthew Ho would go over there. If he could get and settle this thing with those folks, that would happen. Here's these three scenarios. I want to bring this up on screen. This is out of the New York Times. I think I've got these. Yeah. So this is out of my feed, and it has to do with what Matt's talking about, these possibilities. Avril Haines, and you could talk about him plenty. The U.S. Director of National Intelligence recently outlined three plausible scenarios in Ukraine that Matt briefly highlighted. In the first, Russia's continuing progress in eastern Ukraine would break Ukrainians' will to fight and allow the Russian military to take over even more of the country. This outcome is Vladimir Putin's new goal after being defeated in his initial attempt to oust Ukraine's government. I think a lot of people have kind of said this is the very likely scenario, Matt, because a lot of people will flatly say Ukraine ain't winning this one. It's not going to happen. This is the way that it's going to devolve. And do you know for certain, what's he talking about there in the Times about Putin, his first effort to oust Ukraine? Is he talking about that coup attempt in 2014, or is he talking about the onset of this particular war? What the hell's that about?
Haines. She is
or April. Yeah.
I believe it's the assertion that at the beginning of the invasion in February, the Russian military made that push on Kiev, which seemed to have been exactly that: try and make a push down there, grab the government. It could have been a feint. That's something that militaries do. It's a time-honored practice to do a feint, in order to draw Ukrainian forces out of the east as well as away from the Black Sea to defend the capital. That very possible it could have been that, but I don't think that the Russians had this idea that the government was going to just collapse because they invaded. I think they're a little more savvy than that. Yeah, I think they have a better, but who knows? I mean, I'm giving the Russians credit for something I certainly don't give the Americans, and certainly the Russian hubris has been shown very clearly, just as our hubris has been shown continually. So, I think that was the assertion that Haynes is making, that they had tried to knock the government out, and then to get a new government put in there of their own choosing. It didn't work, so now they're going with this plan just to push from the east. And take control of those, semi-autonomous provinces, the Donbass region, and then areas along the Black Sea that they deem strategic, and then have basically a buffer between Ukraine and Russia. And of course, that area would be an area that Russia would control de facto, if not, legally.
This second scenario now, the most likely one. Haynes said during a public appearance in Washington last week, Russia would dominate the East, but would not be able to go much further. The two countries would fall into a stalemate that Haynes described as a grinding struggle. And this kind of gets at the proxy war concept that you spoke of. I mean, this idea that we're going to grind down Russia over the long run, that this will be their soft underbelly, like you've described, was that original strategy in Afghanistan that failed so miserably that over time, Ukraine may prevail, but even if they don't, it will cripple Russia, which is the ultimate goal of some neos in this country.
Yeah, and time is on the side in this scenario for the Americans and for the Ukrainians that support this scenario. What I mean by that is that the more time it takes, the more Ukrainians are able to be trained in long-range artillery and anti-aircraft systems, which are really the two things I see as necessary to keep this stalemate going for the Ukrainians. They have to be able to conduct the artillery and rocket attacks that would hold back the Russians from advancing any further. So they need to receive more of that equipment, more of that, those artillery tubes, those rockets, the short range missiles, in order to hold back a Russian advance, and get into this type of stalemate that's very reminiscent of, say, the First World War. And the same too with anti-aircraft systems. They want to be able to make sure that they are not under the pressure of Russian airstrikes, whether they be from drones or from manned aircraft. And that takes time because you have to get that equipment to them. But more importantly, you have to train their people on how to use it. And that's a major push for the United States Department of Defense now, is teaching Ukrainians how to use these weapons that would allow the conflict to be prolonged, stuck in this stalemate where neither side can advance, neither side can win. And yeah, my opinion is that there's no pushing the Russians out at this point, short of a U.S. NATO entry into the war with an army. And when I say army, I mean it in the military sense of an army, 3 to 5 corps. So that's roughly anywhere from 9 to 20 divisions of infantry, armor, and mechanized forces. So you're talking anywhere from 120,000 to 350,000 troops being sent in to dislodge the Russians.
Well,
plus all the supporting aircraft, artillery,
that's
naval.
World War. I mean,
that's war. That's the only way you get the victory, the win that you hear so much about in the United States media and from American politicians. This idea of winning Ukraine, aside from this grueling stalemate that just offers Ukrainians up for sacrifice as the form of payment to eventually get to the point where, again, this idea that Russia's government's going to collapse because it's exhausted and the people turn against it and they overthrow Putin because they're so upset about Ukraine, which, I just don't, like I said, I think it'd be more likely that Zelensky's government falls before Putin's government falls. And that's the danger you're running into, because who then replaces Zelensky,
Yeah. Well, and that's the third scenario here that you've described. In the third scenario, Ukraine would halt Russia's advance in the east, also succeed in launching counterattacks. Ukraine has already regained some territory, supposedly, especially in the southern part of the country, and some military experts expect a broader offensive soon. Well, okay, going back to this is coming from Haynes, she's whispering in this guy's ear that wrote this article. Well, how's that broader offensive going to come? Well, Matt just let the cat out of the bag. NATO. I mean, that's where the broader offensive will come, not covert U.S. support, but overt U.S. support. And then you've got the world at war. I mean, folks, that is your flashpoint. All right, I'm going to run out of time here if I don't.
Yeah,
Anything else? Did you want to?
well, I was gonna say it's hard to know what's actually happening in the war. The anyone who says with a degree of certainty of what's happening on a day-to-day basis there, and the tactical and operational situation, who's actually not there, I would take what they say with a massive grain of salt. This war has been so propaganda there's been so much propaganda about this war, and the narrative of the war has been so tightly controlled. We're seeing that slip, though. The triumphalism that was on display in Western media about the Ukrainians in the first few months of this war, the constant, like, the Ukrainians are fighting back and they're blowing up tanks and they're doing this and that. You've seen a shift over the last couple months to more reporting that, hey, the Ukrainians are losing 100 to 200 men a day. They've got desertion issues. They've got supply problems. They're clearly outmatched artillery wise by the Russians. The Russians, are steadily advancing. So, anyone who says that, they have a clear understanding, or they're telling you what's happened very clearly, and they're actually not there, I would very much take a grain of salt. And Avril Haines, of course, is someone that you should distrust right off the bat. I think all you need to know about Avril Haines is that she was heavily involved in the Obama administration in terms of making sure that nothing ever came out of the torture that took place under the George Bush administration. Yeah. She was very much involved in helping to cover that up, and making sure there was no accountability for anyone who ever was involved in torture.
Well, and just as an aside, and I brought this up on another podcast, somebody else involved in that, Liz Cheney. Yeah. Folks, we're seeing a lot of that in the news. Okay, let me get to this next one, because this one struck me as a good way to transition to your plight, because this is kind of, I talk to people about these what in the hell news segments. I'm looking at this thing, and it just goes by people. They don't think anything about it. But again, I want to read this briefly, get Matt's take on this. Iranian TV says a UK diplomat, others accused of espionage. Accusations come amid tensions over Tehran's nuclear advances. Tehran, Iran. Iranian state TV said Wednesday that the country's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard had accused the deputy ambassador of the United Kingdom and other foreigners in the country of espionage and taking soil samples from prohibited military zones. The country's state-run IRNA news agency reported that the foreigners had been arrested, but did not elaborate on when. The UK Foreign Office swiftly denied that its diplomat was arrested, calling the report completely false. Well, okay, maybe they didn't arrest anybody. News outlets reported the deputy head of mission at the British Embassy, Giles Whitaker, and other foreigners faced spying charges after visiting various forbidden zones in the country while the guard was carrying out missile tests. Okay, just back again, consider the fact if some Russians had been discovered in a restricted military zone in the United States, what would you see on Rachel Maddow, for instance? My God, the semi-official Fars news agency, believed to be close to the guard, claimed Whitaker was expelled from the area after offering authorities an apology. All right, now the reason I want people to start thinking here, because this is what I'm thinking when I'm reading this. I'm thinking Julian. I'm thinking Julian Assange. Think about espionage charges. Think about what we have done to that guy sitting in Belmarsh prison, and think about that while I finish this story. The report added that the Guard's intelligence wing detained the husband of Austria's cultural attaché in Iran after he took soil samples in the country's northeast. Iran has in the past arrested dual nationals and those with Western ties, often on widely criticized espionage charges, and used them as bargaining chips in talks over other issues such as nuclear negotiations. Tehran denies using detainees to further its political aims. Talks to revive Tehran's tattered nuclear deal. Why is it tattered? Because we tore it up. That's why it's tattered, folks. That's what Donald Trump did with world powers have stalled for months. A recent effort to break the deadlock between the U.S. and Iranian negotiators ended without making progress in Doha last week. The U.S. Special Envoy for Iran, Robert Malley, described the latest talks in Qatar as more than a little bit of a wasted occasion. They have, and including in Doha, added demands that I think anyone looking at this would be viewed as having nothing to do with the nuclear deal. things that they've wanted in the past. Malley said in an interview with National Public Radio on Tuesday, undercutting Tehran's more upbeat assessments. He added that the U.S. is working simultaneously to secure the release of 4 Americans detained in Iran. Probably will be able to do that. If they are actually being detained there, Iran probably will give these people up. Guess who ain't giving Assange up? The UK isn't doing it. And that's the background for this thing. And the United States wants him extradited here to stand charges. They've been used as pawns. But we are looking at steps that we could take that would facilitate their return in the shortest time possible. Now, here's something interesting, Matt. You can comment on this also. I haven't seen this a lot in coverage, but the shadow war, flatly stated here, between Israel and Iran has escalated in Tehran and across the Middle East. They just kind of worked this in here. Oh, okay, it is a shadow war. Iran announced last month that the head of the Guard's intelligence arm had been replaced by Kazemi, the former head of the Guard's security department. So there's a lot there, Matt, but go ahead and unpack some of that for us.
Yeah, I mean, first with the shadow war, I don't know how you use the term shadow, because there are assassinations that occur regularly in Iran that it's widely understood that it's the Israelis who are assassinating particularly key members of the Iranian nuclear program. And they don't have a nuclear weapons program, but they do have a nuclear program. And of course, the whole purpose of the JCPOA, the agreement the Obama administration entered into, along with Russia, France, and the United Kingdom, was to ensure that Iran did not build a nuclear weapon. And by tearing that up, what other options do the Iranians have, particularly where they're being pushed in so many ways? I mean, that's not to defend the Iranian government. We get this silly binary way of looking at things in the United States, where if you say one thing, it automatically means you support the other. So if you say that the United States has got a terrible policy towards Iran, that must mean that you somehow are in favor of the Ayatollah. If we've got this inane binary way of looking at things here, right? And I know you're sick of that as well, George. One of the things to note was that the Brit who was supposedly arrested, the number 2 guy at the embassy, as soon as I hear number 2 guy, a lot of times, not all the time, but many times it's known that the number 2 person at the embassy is a spy. That's how it often works. That's the way it often works. It just does. And not just for the Americans or the Brits, but for my understanding, the same thing with the Austrians. My knowledge is dated now. I've been away from this for a while, but I recall the Austrians being an intelligence unit organization that the Austrian intelligence folks were worked very well with the American intelligence people. My knowledge again might be dated, but that's what I recall. And so, seeing that the Austrian cultural attaché was someplace he shouldn't be, and doing whatever he was doing, and maybe he was just out there taking photos and having a picnic. I don't know, but I mean, it's kind of like you say, if a Russian or Chinese or Iranian or whoever our enemies are, if one of their folks was outside of one of our, the White Sands, missile testing range, doing whatever, taking
on
soil
video
samples, video and everything else, we'd be upset too and probably arrest the guy as well. So, I mean, I believe the Iranian government about as much as I believe the American government. So it's hard to say who's right in this, or the British government in this case. I mean, none of them have any credibility with me. I wish at some point they would kind of do something to restore that credibility when it comes to these issues. But what you see, though, is this continual pressure on Iran, which forces the Iranians to push back. And why they push back is because when you put pressure from the outside, what that causes the population to do is to support the hardliners. And so we've seen this continually, where even you had a case where you had a moderate Iranian leader just lose election recently in the last year or so to a conservative because people are under the pressure of sanctions. They see how we entered into this agreement with the West, and the West just threw it away. They killed our most famous general. I mean, literally, it was as if when we killed when Donald Trump assassinated General Soleimani in Iran, that was as if they had as if someone had done that to Eisenhower. I mean, it was that level. And
they don't forget. That's the other thing.
Why would
we forget, but they don't forget.
Well, I
stand
don't
by
know
for.
about I don't know how much we forget. I got people driving around with Confederate flags on their pickup trucks around here. I mean, so it's still fighting the Civil War. I mean, like, so, I
Yeah,
mean, like, but why should they forget? I
yeah,
mean, so this is what happens when you put that pressure. It forces the population to support the more reactionary, the conservative. It feeds right into the hardliners' hands. And so the hardliners in Iran, then they do something which feeds into the hardliners' hands here in the US or in Israel or wherever. And you get this cycle going where it's as if they've coordinated, right, these psychopaths, whether it be in the United States, in Iran, or in Israel, or whatever, to how can we continue to ratchet things up? So you see this, and where does it go? What we're seeing, where does this lead us to? And at some point, something is going to happen. That's going to be. I mean, this was the big fear. And the Iranians did retaliate when the United States killed General Soleimani. They fired 15 or 16 missiles at our air base in Iraq, and thankfully those missiles are not good missiles. And this goes to show the Iranian military is not something. It's like kind of with the Russian military. They've proven that they're not this great threat by how poorly they have done in Ukraine. The same with the Iranians. All this big fear over the Iranian missile program. They fire 15 missiles at Al Assad Air Base, which is an enormous air base. I've been there, and about less than half of them even hit the base, and only a couple actually hit areas of the base that actually had anyone living on them. And I mean, we're supposed to be afraid of this missile program where they couldn't hit, a base from 200 miles away from where they launched the missiles, or 300 miles away, or however far it was, but what had happened if that had been successful? What would have happened if they had killed a bunch of Americans in that strike? That would have given Donald Trump and his people all the reason to launch a massive strike on Iran, right? It would have given everybody the war they wanted. Those folks who want war, which unfortunately exists, not just in the United States, but there are plenty of Iranian hardliners that want that war as well, because they feel, I mean, among other things, they look at what happened in Afghanistan and look at what happened in Iraq, and they believe that they could defeat the Americans just as the Iraqis and the Afghans could, and that this would prove their place in history. It would help reestablish the prominence of Iran, et cetera, et cetera. It would prove the whole point. Many of them are still tied to the revolution, prove the whole point of the revolution. They would be these heroes for this. I mean, so when we talk about these things, we have to give agency to the quote other side, and that's what the danger is here, is that where are the actual sane minds involved in this who are doing what they can? It goes back to this idea that Blinken has never met with Lavrov in the last 6 months. And he has an opportunity, and then maybe there'll be a chance encounter. Like, what are they going to be standing in line at the Starbucks?
It's a joke,
and chatting it up. Yeah, I mean, it is. It's a fucking joke,
And if you're dead and in the ground, man, it ain't no joke. I'm telling you. And thousands are. Honest to God, I don't know what we're thinking of sometimes. Well, I wanted to transition.
I quote you all the time with your 2020 quote. I quote you all the time with that. 20 years we can be dead from climate change, or 20 minutes from nuclear war, and we just keep marching that way.
Yeah, and our expenditures look like it. I had Stephen Semler on. The NDAA annually is about $1 trillion, folks. So we spent $44 billion in the Biden budget. That's what he allocated to combat climate that's going to kill us all in 20 years if we don't address it in a serious fashion. And that's kind of your ratio. That's what we're looking at in that 2020 world. Well, I'm going to bring this up on screen because, again, that's kind of the what in the hell story. And before we leave that, I got to tell Matt's right about those embassy things. I figured that shit out in the 80s with the U.S. Embassy in Iran and the American hostages that were taken there. I remember looking at that, and I'm just a cub reporter and looking at an AP wire thinking, why in the hell would they do that? Well, these embassies are spy outposts. They're not handing out hall passes or visas or something like that. They've got huge dishes and listening devices. And I mean, that's what they're really doing in these countries. Those people are spies by and large. I mean, wake up and smell the coffee, folks.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, to defend the American embassies, they are, but they also have a big role in selling weapons. That's what they do.
Oh, yeah.
They also sell weapons, The embassies are supposed to represent Americans abroad. And there's always been an issue with embassies, their primary purpose being commercial, right? Make sure businesses excel overseas. That's a primary purpose.
Yeah.
Right. And that is. And for us, right? We talked about this. What other exports do we have?
Yeah, that's number one, baby. Yeah. Blow them up. All right. Let me get to this next I wanted to bring this up, okay, on screen because this is finally we're going to get to what we are here for, and this has to do with what he's talking to everybody about here over the past week or two. The North Carolina State Board of Elections just voted 3-2 not to certify the Green Party ballot access petition. We needed 13,865 signatures, and the North Carolina Green Party submitted 15,953 verified signatures. Now, that word verified is important here. We did everything required, and they just said no. Is this what democracy looks like, you ask? And I brought this up on the show with our Lucan Endowed Professor of Political Science, Dr. Stephen W. Schmidt, and even he was surprised to see the audacity of this. Okay, now this next part of it has to do with your Green Party attorney being silenced during this thing. Now, I actually have this clip. I want to play this because, I mean, this is great. It really illustrates what we're talking about. Set up this clip for us, Matt, that we're going to be looking at with Oliver Hall.
Right. So we had the total amount of signatures we submitted were 22,500. And then out of that number, 15,953 were verified by the county boards of elections. The counties are the ones that do the verification. You know, you turn the signatures in and they check their voter registration rolls, make sure the signature is correct, all the information, et cetera. And so we were over the number by almost 2,100 in terms of what we needed. The state received our signatures on June 1st. We'd met all our deadlines before that, done everything procedurally correct. They took a full 30 days because this is another important piece to understand how none of this was happening in good faith, because there is a July 1st deadline as well. We had to be nominated. We had to be certified by the state on July 1st. And in order to be certified by the state to be on the ballot, after the state board certifies us, we then would have to do an organizing convention. We'd have to have our people change registration to Green Party, and the candidates would have to file for candidacy. So by meeting on June 30th, even if they had certified us, they were giving us less than 24 hours to accomplish all the other statutory requirements necessary to be on the ballot. So they're right going into this had been done in bad faith. We have been working with the State Board of Elections for 30 days on this, meeting with their investigators. There were, as far as we were understood, 200 signatures or so that they were concerned about. Only in those 200 signatures they were concerned about that we cooperated fully with them on, none of those counted as verified signatures. So it didn't take away from the total of 15,953 that we had. And so the state argued, though, that, and the board of the State Board of Elections is 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. The Democrats argued that because there had been these irregularities, that means there could be more irregularities. And even though we've taken 30 days and we haven't found any evidence of that, there could be more, so we need more time. But because tomorrow's the deadline, we don't have that time. So we're not going to certify you. And that was it.
Which means no third party's getting on the ballot.
Because
there's always going to be a few irregularities with any petition. I mean, what the hell?
Always. And we were never presented with we were told aspects of it, but we were never really presented with the evidence where we could say, oh, that makes sense. You know, so-and-so turned that in, or, you know, one of the things is that there's supposedly a dead person who signed. We have no idea who that person is, or so it's kind of like, well, we started collecting signatures in February 2021. It's very possible that someone signed this last year and has passed away, unfortunately, over the past year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's all kinds of it's all onesies and twosies and things that are explainable and understandable and don't in any way add up to, anything that would take away from our total that would put us below the threshold. And again, we've been working with knowing about 200 of these things that they had pointed out. And so what happens is that as they're saying this, our attorney, and we were not allowed to engage in the hearing really at all. Our attorney at the very beginning of the hearing was allowed to give a statement for a few minutes, but he didn't even know what they were going to present. So he couldn't argue or make a case or anything for any of it. So at the end, he finally was allowed to ask one question. And he said, Mr. Chairman, does this does anything you're talking about affect our verified signatures?
Yeah,
that affects our ability to be certified. And the chair said, no. I'm not going to answer that question. There's a criminal investigation going on. At that point, there was no criminal investigation going on. Now we're seeing this week that they're saying there might be a criminal investigation. We don't even know because we've had no communication from the State Board of Elections in the last week. So anyway, he says, no, I'm not going to answer that. Our attorney tries to follow up. And then the chair shouts our attorney down and mutes his microphone. And that was our due process.
I've got this film clip and this thing. I got it off your Twitter feed. Now, this is public record, right? This
this
hearing,
public
this
record,
video. Yeah. Okay. So watch this, folks, and think about casting shade. I think is the best way to describe this as we go through this thing. And the other thing is, for my Ghostbuster fan friends out there, this guy is not Rick Moranis. Okay. So watch this. It'll take a second or two to get going here, but watch this.
I would like to, and I'm hopeful that we can get to the bottom of this, and it would be my personal desire, to see this new party on the ballot. But given what's in front of us today, I can't in good conscience vote to certify today. So I would like to wait, give our staff enough time to go through this process. If there's a motion to vote on this today, I will be voting no.
Mr. Chairman, may I be recognized?
Yeah, Mr. Hall, let's make it brief though, please.
Well, thank you. Is there any question as to the validity of the 15,953 signatures that have been validated by state county boards of elections?
Mr. Hall, I don't want to get into the details of a criminal investigation, but I have questions sufficient in number to be not willing to vote for certification today.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I asked the question because the board is effectively presuming that there is some question as to the validity of those signatures by delaying the certification and possibly rejecting the certification of the Green Party petitions. And if there is some presumption here that is operative, the presumption ought to be that validated signatures are valid, unless there is some basis for considering them invalid or at least subject to further investigation. So again, the question is there any basis for considering or questioning the validity of any one of those 15,953 validated signatures?
And I will thank you for your comments to the board. I will stand by my earlier assertion, and I will ask any other board members if they have questions.
Mr. Chairman, you have not answered the question. You are now
Mr. Hall, you're out of order, sir. Go ahead and mute Mr. Hall, please. I'll ask the board members if they have any other questions for staff.
Okay, so there you go. And Matt talked about that little axiom that I use on the show all the time about 2020. The other one that I use, are they too dumb or are they in on it? Now, this guy, this is what he does. This is his major responsibility in life, I think, probably. And he knows that these petitions are all going to have irregularities. He knows by putting this on hold and not approving this, that will effectively remove you from the ballot. This guy, I don't think he's too dumb. I think he's in on it.
Oh, and he's supposed to be in on it. I mean, it's a partisan operation. I mean, and one of the things I want to make clear is that I know that if I was not on the left, if I was on the right and I was a conservative candidate, or we were a conservative party, I should say, that it would have been reversed and the Republicans would have been arguing against us and the Democrats for us. I mean, this is one of the reasons why we are doing this. This validates everything we say about the two-party system being exclusionary, corrupt, and undemocratic. It exists just simply to protect itself, and more specifically to protect, in my opinion, its big money donors. You know, and this is where two-party system leads to. I think the brazenness of it, I'm pleased to hear Dr. Schmidt was surprised at it, you know, because, and I'm hearing that from so many other people, people who've been involved in politics for 30 years, journalists who've been covering politics for 20 years. They're all saying, like, I have never seen anything like this. And so we are getting very good media on this. We're getting very good local media on this. State newspapers have been really, the two biggest newspapers in the state have been really terrific in their coverage. I don't want to call it favorable coverage because they're just simply reporting what is happening.
Facts.
And we have the facts. And the same thing too, the local NPR stations here, up here and down in Charlotte, they're, putting, whole episodes of podcasts out about this. I mean, and then we're getting all coverage all over the places, and folks, lefty YouTubers and podcasters have been really fantastic. The amount of support we're getting from people all around the country, but in North Carolina, it means a lot to us. We haven't even gotten into the whole parallel aspect of this, where the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee and the Elias law firm, Mark Elias being arguably the most prominent Democratic attorney in the country, down here for several weeks now, working against us, trying to get us removed from the ballot using clearly fraudulent messages to do so, and we have recordings of all that and everything else.
I got one here. I got these clips. This is great. I want people to look at this and listen to this very closely, because this is someone calling a petition signees, or somebody that they don't know that is close to Matt's campaign, and they're trying to get them to rescind their signature on this petition. This is great stuff. It shows you the nefarious.
And this is the work of the Elias law firm and the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee.
Yeah, check this out.
You're calling to confirm whether or not I signed a petition. Mass, who are you calling with? What organization? Oh, is this the Green Party?
Yes.
You're with the Green Party?
Yes, and we have you listed as wanting to get the candidates on the North Carolina ballot. Did you sign that petition?
So you were calling as a representative of the Green Party?
As a volunteer, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I did sign it.
Okay, and would you say you strongly support it or just somewhat support it?
I mean, I don't think I'd sign something unless I strongly support it.
Okay, well, thank you for confirming. Animal participation in elections is important. If the Green Party is on the ballot, it will take votes away from Democrats, giving Republicans a huge advantage that will help them win North Carolina in 2022 and 2024. There's far too much at stake to let this happen. Are you interested in asking to have your name removed from this petition, or leave it as is?
I'm confused. So if you're with the Green Party, why are you asking to remove? I'm sorry?
Yes, I totally.
My God. I mean, this shows you the nefarious stuff that's going on behind the curtain, or really in front of the curtain. I mean, it's in full view, these people being contacted directly. Then this board of elections on a 3-2 vote. And again, if people saw my little opener for this, the Democrats are, this is a partisan thing, because the Democrats view Matt's candidacy as most harmful to their Democratic candidate, because Matt supports these issues that I have on my show all the time on climate, war, and healthcare, that their candidate will not uplift, will not support. So they know that he is a problem for them, and they would like him to go away. They would like for him to disappear. And rather, here's the thing, Matt, I tell people, and I told Doc Politics this on my show too, what we would be hopeful of with your candidacy is that they would be so fearful of you that they would assimilate some of those issues, that they would come along and say, okay, damn it, Matt, I mean, you're doing this. We're going to go ahead and do something about climate, war, and healthcare. This candidate in the Democratic Party, I don't even know who it is in North Carolina that's running, will address these issues and make some promises and do something, for God's sake. But if they can do it on a technicality, if they can do it with this kind of crap like we're seeing in these clips, they don't have to do any of that. And that's to all of our detriment.
Right. And they're not threatened by me, or they're not threatened by the Green Party. They're threatened by these issues being on the ballot. They're threatened by the people who represent. I'll also say they're threatened by our folks, our people. We went out there, our folks went out there, and just what they accomplished. People were saying right and left to us, you're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to be able to get that many signatures, getting tens of thousands of signatures. You don't have the money to bring in the petitioning firms, and you won't be able to accomplish this. And we did it, and we organized, and our folks went out there and they accomplished it. They executed it beautifully. And now the fact that they're being accused of fraud or whatever is incredibly angering, very upsetting. And if I wasn't pissed off before, now I'm really pissed off, and we were told, like, you need to bring in these petitioning firms, and 95% of what we did was with our people, with our volunteers and our party members and our campaign members. we did this. And that scares them because they know the polls. The two-party system, in this case, the Democrats, they know the polls. They see the polls. They know the discontent. They know how unpopular they are. They know how they're failing people and have been failing people for decades. And now when they see how that becomes organized and effective and achieves something like meets a goal or a standard to get on the ballot that they didn't think a third party would be able to do, now they get scared. And the other thing too is, these issues, if we're not on the ballot, no one is going to be representing single payer healthcare, rent control, living wages, action on the climate, ending the war on drugs. All those things are serious dangers to their big money donors. That's why they don't want them on the ballot. So one of the things I look at when I do that is why I'm doing this and how I'm doing this, and kind of the strategy behind it is, one, to help build a party that's part of a larger movement, because I believe a party has to be part of a movement, not a party for itself, but one arm of a larger body. And there is a gap on the left for that. The Democrats in North Carolina are running 15 people at the federal level. Only one supports single-payer healthcare, Medicare for all. Only one out of 15. There's also a Democrat running out of that 15 who votes to defund Planned Parenthood in the state house. And there's another Democrat running who last month voted to support the Don't Say Gay bill in the state Senate. So, you also have that in the Democratic Party. But the other two aspects of the strategy, besides building, is to do exactly what you said, is to, get them to take on some of these issues. I don't care who brings about single payer healthcare. I don't care, as long as our people get it. So Republicans could do it for all I care. But this is what has occurred. Most especially from the 1880s to the 1920s. And Dr. Schmidt could talk about this better than I could. The People's Party or the Populist Party, and then the Progressives, and then the Socialists. Those issues were taken over, assumed by the Democrats, Republicans, particularly say issues of labor. And then the third aspect of it is this idea of at some point, I don't accept the title of spoiler, but I'm happy to take on the title of disruptor. And that we disrupt the system so much by the constant presence of third parties and independents in a system that's designed for two-party, that the system can't function, and that the Democrats and Republicans start taking losses because there are multiple candidates in a two-party system. And eventually they say, okay, we have to move, we have to amend, we have to reform, we have to fix this broken system. And that brings about ranked choice voting and ultimately what I would like to see, proportional representation, but as well as a host of other issues, say abolishing the electoral college and getting money out of politics, possibly term limits, but all those things are only going to happen if we put the pressure on the system, if we disrupt the system. And so running third-party candidates and independent candidates is a way to do that. It also aligns with my views that we should have a multi-party, multi-candidacy, issues-based electoral system.
Well, that's great. And we're out of time. That's extremely well said, as always. We covered a lot of ground here today, but my God, this is an eye opener, to say the very least. And this Mark Elias guy and these Democrats coming out, I don't know. I wouldn't have believed it a few years ago, but I'm a believer now. And we are out of time, so I want to put this up on screen. I'm going to put and the web address here is very simple. But okay, so we do a lot of complaining, bitching, pissing, and moaning on this show, like I tell people. But people want to know, okay, what do we do? What can we do? How do we fight back? Well, you've got something for them at MatthewHoforSenate.org about fighting back.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of things. You can go there. We've got a whole list of things that people can do to help us. I'll point out two. Certainly if you're in North Carolina, you can volunteer. You can volunteer from outside North Carolina as well. So please sign up to volunteer if you're interested. But, the two most prominent are tell people about this, share this, continue to support people like George who talk about issues like this. But let people know about it. And importantly, contact your media, or contact CNN or Fox or whoever, Washington Post, New York Times, and say, why aren't you covering this? Why aren't you talking about this? Look at what's happening here. And there's a ton of media coverage here in North Carolina that you can use to say, look, it's not the campaign that's saying this. It's not the Green Party that's saying this. This is what the Charlotte Observer is saying about this. So this is what the NPR station in Chapel Hill is saying about this, right? So please share that, get that out, help influence people to cover this. And then the other thing is, unfortunately, we need money. We're up against Leviathan here. We are in a true David versus Goliath battle. They brought down Mark Elias right away to fight us. There's no one in the bullpen past Mark Elias. He is the biggest of the big in the Democratic Party. And we need support for the challenges that we are up against, for the legal action that we'll have to take to get ourselves on the ballot, the place on the ballot that we rightfully earned. And so we need your support. So if you're able to donate, please go to MatthewHoferSenate.org. Please donate, and please encourage others to donate as well.
I just put this tweet up by Felonious Funk. I wanted to ask you about this. Is this correct on this Mark Elias guy, the person who orchestrated the coup? As Felonious Funk says, Mark Elias was previously Hillary's chief counsel. Okay, we know that. That's a certainty. Is a member of the Federalist Society, along with Clarence Thomas, Gorsuch, Barrett, Kavanaugh, Alito, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, Ed Meese, Gail Norton, all of those conservative right-wing nutcakes in the Federalist Society. Is he a member of that? Do you know?
That's the first I've seen that. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me, but a lot of this doesn't make sense to me,
Yeah.
and it could be true. And if it was, it would be kind of a head scratcher, but then it wouldn't surprise me. We're in the alligator pit here, and none of it really seems to make sense at times. And we just have to realize that, again, this is transactional. It goes back to what I said about Blinken and the others in the government. They're all influence peddlers and access peddlers. And, transaction is what they thrive upon and what they live upon. And that's what they try to accomplish, is something that's best for them. So if this guy if he is a member of the Federal Society, it would seem really upside down to me that he would be, but I don't know. I don't know either.
And just take that with it's off Twitter, obviously, folks.
Yeah.
I just pulled that to bring it up there. But I would say that, again, shows you maybe how right-wing some factions of the Democratic Party are. Well, We're out of time. We got to run here, Matt. This is the last thing that you wanted to have happen at this juncture. I mean, I know you were looking forward to maybe being on a debate stage and maybe doing some campaigning. Now you're going to be bogged down with paperwork and lawsuits and that. I mean, is that what's next? Is this a litigious thing? I mean, is it lawsuit time? What are we doing?
I can't get into specifics about it until it happens. And when it does happen, I'm happy to talk to you about it again. It is. One of those things it does is that this type of restrictive, this type of use of ballot access as voter suppression, basically, is it's so onerous and so arduous and causes such it's so resource intensive in terms of time, labor, money, effort, organization, that when we were doing the ballot access, that's really all we could do. I mean, we're a grassroots campaign. I don't have a staff of 225 people. Like, all we could do was the ballot access, which is fine. It got us on the ballot, or should have gotten us on the ballot. And we were out there talking to people. So there's benefits that come from it. So, but then the thing is, in the back end of that, after you turn your signatures in, now you're bogged down procedurally. You're bogged down administratively, bureaucratically. You have to talk to the investigators. You got to talk with your lawyer. You got to find a lawyer. You got to do, all these different things that, for a small grassroots campaign, it eats away all your time.
And they know it.
Yeah, they know it, and it's deliberate to do that. And
it
puts stress. And thankfully, I've got a great group. But if you didn't have a great group with this type of stress, it'd be easy for you guys to blow apart and fracture and fight amongst yourselves. Then the other thing too is it dominates the narrative. I'm not talking about healthcare. I'm not talking about the war on drugs. I'm not talking about housing. I'm talking. I'm answering questions of, when did you stop committing fraud? That's the right. That's
why did you do that, Matt?
So it's kind of, so it is, and that's deliberate as well, because it makes the conversation totally about the State Board of Elections. Did we or did we not commit? Why did they say that? Then you get into a complicated explanation that puts people to sleep. So it is. It's masterful in how they keep people out, how they keep small parties, grassroots party, independent candidates out of politics. This is all well designed. And there's other levels to it, like the FEC and the IRS and the state election boards, like their regulations are so vague and so obtuse that people are afraid to get into politics because they're afraid of getting punished, afraid of getting fined by the IRS because you did something wrong, afraid of the same thing happening by the FEC. I've met people throughout this time campaign, as I've been doing this, who run as candidates for independent or third parties, and they refuse to go above, say, if they're running for a U.S. House or U.S. Senate seat, they refuse to go above the $5,000 limit that the FEC has for reporting, because they know that if they go cross that $5,000 threshold, now they've got to be responsible to the FEC. And I tell you, if you don't have a good group of people who know how to deal with that and do with that, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. I'm saying that straight out, because I keep the book here. It's right here. The congressional candidate and committee guide book, and it is masterful in how vague it is, how obtuse it is, that you need experienced people to do this. Otherwise, you're going to get in trouble. And they know that. And that keeps people out, or it keeps them at the level where, like, look, I'm going to run for the House, but, I'm not going to. And the same thing happens at the state level. I know people who are like, I'm going to run but I don't have anyone who can be a treasurer who can deal with all that. So, and this is where the two parties come into, because if you run with the parties, they will support you. They've got all that infrastructure. Try and go outside, then good luck figuring it out. And if you screw it up, we're going to come after you. And that keeps people out.
Well, the old tried and true methodology has worked in the past, and it'll work again here very shortly. And I don't know, it said, and I think you mentioned it, they won't be able to print the ballots to get you on. I mean, that's coming up fairly quickly again.
That's their last line of defense. And you can kind of see their mindset, and even some of the things that they said actually publicly this week about possibly doing it over again, that the State Board of Elections, because they've just gotten hammered with bad press on this, well, maybe we'll come back and look at it again after we've had time. But the problem being is, one, you've got this deadline of mid-August to print the ballots, which, as I kind of understand, is courts generally tend not to interfere with that, because that is a real deadline. Like, you have to get them printed because you need X amount of weeks to do that. And then you've got to get them out for the absentee ballots. And so the courts, as far as I understand with that, are reluctant to really get involved with that kind of deadline. The other thing is, we had our July 1st deadline to have this all accomplished by, and there's nothing in the statute that allows for relief from that. There's nothing in there to grant a waiver. There's nothing. I mean, so we would have to go to the courts to settle that issue. That, look, so the fact that the State Board of Elections is now saying, well, maybe we can reconsider this, they've already went past the deadline, and they know it, and they did that purposefully. Again, they had 30 days to certify us. We turned those signatures in. They were already verified by the counties. The state statute says that the State Board of Elections is to receive our signatures and immediately and forthwith certify us as a political party, because the counties have already done their work. And they chose to take 30 days and on the last possible day have this meeting with that July 1st deadline. So, I mean, that's also up again. They know what they're doing. They're not too dumb. They're in on it. They are party loyalists who are in the position they're in because they know they've been counted upon by the party, that when an issue like this comes up, they will do the right thing for the party. They're all going to get their Christmas bonuses this year. They did very well for the party.
Yeah, the right thing for the party and the wrong thing for us, folks.
Right.
Well, it's a good place to leave it. We'll circle back. I hope there's some good news on this very shortly, and you can get back on the campaign trail and raising these issues that are affecting us all. The big three on Podcast by George has been and will always be climate, war, and healthcare. And this is your guy, folks, to address those issues. Go to MatthewHoeforSenate.org. I've had that up on, there it is again. That's the web address. Go there. Throw him some money, a volunteer. Hell, just send him an email. Just pat him on the back a little bit. He needs your support, folks. I mean, this is great, Matt. We'll circle back again very shortly.
All right. Thanks, George.
And folks, if you like Podcast by George, if you like seeing Matthew Hoh and hearing issues like this getting the light that they deserve, go to podcastbygeorge.com, pick a platform, Facebook and YouTube to see the videos, pick the other platforms if you want to get audio-only versions, Spotify and iTunes and, the iHeartRadio app and places like that. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.